Okay, welcome everyone. We are going to get started here in just a minute. We'll give folks a few seconds to pop on here and we'll kick it off. Okay, well, good afternoon everyone and welcome to today's webinar on achieving and maintaining CMMC compliance with Google Workspace. I am delighted to introduce my colleague and our expert speaker, Kevin McGrail. Kevin, who's known to many as Cam, is a distinguished cybersecurity expert with extensive experience in various compliance frameworks. His background combines deep technical knowledge and implementation strategies that have helped numerous organizations successfully navigate the complex requirements of federal cybersecurity standards. His insights today will be particularly valuable as more contractors in the DoD supply chain and the defense industrial base chain seek to align their cloud productivity suites with the new requirements. So without further delay, I will pass the mic and presentation over to Cam, who will guide us through the essential aspects of CMMC compliance within Google Workspace.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, David. Again, my name is Kevin A. McGrail, but you can call me Cam. Please put questions in the chat. I look forward to answering any of your specific questions. Contact information will also be on the final slide when we get to questions and answers. And I thought we'd start this off just with a little bit of basics. Nothing, too diving into the whole meat of CMMC. If you don't know what CMMC is and you've been living under a rock, there's plenty of great sources about it. But over the last few years, we've evolved. In last fall, we have now got a final rule that put into place CMMC 2.0. And pretty much what I felt was that most of the people here are going to be here for 5 reasons. They're here because of that final rule going into place in December. They're here because they are dealing with CUI with the Department of Defense. You are looking for a path to CMMC compliance. You want to know how Google Workspace can help, and you want some tips and tricks. And that is what I've hoped to give you in this presentation. So a little bit of an overview, won't dive into this a whole bunch, but a lot of what Google is focusing on is the people that are at level 2. At Dido, we do have solutions for all 3 levels, but at level 2, you do have to have what is known as a NIST Special Publication 800-171 program. And that program has to meet 110 controls. Those are basically requirements, if you think about it, for basic cybersecurity and for the handling of controlled unclassified information, also known as QE. You'll notice that at level 1, you only have to meet 15 of the principles, and at level 2, you have to meet all 110, and then level 3 has to do with how often you have to get audited, etc. So these are different levels depending on exactly what type of classified or controlled unclassified information that you're handling. Let's see if I can get the slides to go forward. So, a big announcement earlier this year. It all got announced early in March, but basically, Google has simplified the stack for using Google Workspace for CMMC. Prior to that announcement, you used to have to use 4 different SKUs, and those 4 individual SKUs were quite expensive, very onerous to implement. Google has now codified it into 2 different things that you need. So, first of all, you'll notice if you're at level 2 and above, you must be at Google. You must be using Google Workspace Enterprise Plus. That's the only SKU that will work. Additionally, you'll need an add-on for the Google Workspace, Assured Controls Plus. Talk about that in another slide here. And overall, Google has also produced with a 3PAO a 178-page configuration guideline. I would call it a hardening document to get you started towards your CMMC compliance for Google Workspace. And these slides will be available. You don't have to horribly and scurrilously write down links. We'll give them to you. But one of the big things you get is Assured Controls Plus is will be needed. And this is a largely hidden, something I refer to as kind of a wizard behind the curtain. It's a comprehensive solution. It helps give you everything you need to meet your compliance and security needs. At a very high level, it has controls about who can access your data. It manages when your data can be accessed. It enforces things like client-side encryption. It helps you meet many different compliance standards, things like CJIS, that's for the Justice Department, IRS 1075, ITAR, IL4, et cetera, but also CMMC. It gives you 7 core functions. The 7 core functions of Assured Controls Plus are going to be access management, access approvals, CSE defaults, CSE hardware key support, advanced reporting, local data storage, and the compliance hub. And you have to use this. This is 100% required to meet your CMMC audits. If you're using Google Workspace, you've already started going through an audit, you're not using Assured Controls Plus, you'll definitely want to reach out to us to get this added to your solution. If you're using Assured Controls in a TAM, those 4 previous things that we talked about, you could still be compliant, but this is definitely the way forward. There are quite a few key benefits of it. First of all, you're going to get all native Google Workspace. You're going to get the out-of-the-box security. You're going to get very, very high security, no compromises. You're going to have advanced real-time collaboration with Workspace, and you're going to get a very compliant infrastructure. One of the things that I like pointing out about Google Workspace versus some of the competitors is that Google didn't sit down and design a different implementation for the government. Instead, what they said is, what do we have to do to lift our entire ecosystem and make it meet various compliance standards? So in this particular case, you don't need to have a special SKU. You don't have to be on a GovCloud. You don't have to have a specific solution. You just have to have the right SKUs, the Enterprise Workspace Plus and the Assured Controls Plus together are, general commercial off-the-shelf products. You can order them, pretty basically and meet the requirements once you've configured them and follow the compliance guidelines. But that no separate environment is a big deal. Doesn't mean you might not need a different instance. We'll talk about that with carve-outs, but you don't need a specific GovCloud. Now, there is an elephant in the room. As I mentioned, I did talk about the fact that there are other providers that do meet it. The biggest one that most people are talking about is Microsoft and Microsoft 365. And I won't sugarcoat things. I don't think that that's the right solution most people should go for. Google Workspace is very able to meet the CMMC compliance. I was the subject matter expert that brought the first federal agency onto Google's cloud. I helped at the same time with Google getting their authority to operate their systems. And I can tell you undoubtedly that the security posture was significantly better after that, even with all the resources that a federal agency has to bring. On top of that, there are some key benefits, 5 of them that I would bring up when I'm comparing to Microsoft. First of all, it's more affordable. The Microsoft SKUs that you're going to need to do this are going to, at a minimum, start with GCC High. It's going to cost at least $17 a month based on list pricing. I'm aware people can negotiate things, but the list pricing, you're going to start at $17 per user per month higher. So that's over $200 a user per year just for the licensing. On top of that, Microsoft does not have a very good security record. Google's isn't perfect, but at the same time, I don't think that Google security has ever really been described as incompetent. It's a very secure by design. It's a very new, in relative terms, design. And that's really kind of the main thing. Google is more modern. It's not got a whole lot of legacy design, and it doesn't have this kind of like a monkey on its back like Microsoft has, trying to make very, very old software still work today. Microsoft not that long ago didn't even have logins, and all of a sudden now you're trying to put modern cybersecurity standards on it, and it just doesn't work all the time. But resources, there are excellent resources. I mentioned the CMMC implementation guide. It was vetted by a 3PAO. For those who don't know, that's a third-party audit organization. And what they do is make sure that the implementation that you have meets all the requirements. So rather than just reading the entire NIST 800-171 and then figuring out how to translate that to Google Workspace. Google has provided a document to help you do that. That will then help you create your documentation that then can help, if you're one of the levels that needs to be audited, pass those audits more routinely. But at the end of the day, this isn't just about CMMC. It's about being comprehensive and the base cybersecurity and Google's ability to collaborate securely as well as control your data is really unparalleled. All right, I'll stop with that, and I will check to see if there's any questions in the chat. I don't see any yet, but please do put them in there. So I will move on to some CMMC tips and tricks. So there's a couple of quotes that I'll sprinkle in here from some customers as well that I particularly find useful. But when we're talking about CMMC, I could probably give you about 100 different tips. But the first one I'm going to start with is do not guess your level. I have a lot of organizations that come to me and they don't know what level they're going to be at. And they start saying, well, I think we're going to be level 1, or I think we're going to be level 2. Unfortunately, most of my experience so far is that people are going to be at a higher level than they think they're going to be at. The answer that you have to have is you have to be talking to your contract officer representatives, or you need to be talking to your primes. There are some concerns around something called a roll down requirement. So for example, if you are a sub for a prime who is level 3, there may be a roll down requirement that you be at the same level as the prime. Additionally, you'll get some guidance from the cores as far as what they think the data is going to be. Many people do not understand that impact levels, and this is an impact level, are really decided by the customer, not by the vendor. So you have to talk to the company, or excuse me, the DoD representative, the prime that you're working for, to figure out where your level is. And it's very important that you figure that out, because that will really set you up for what is your end goal going to be. Additionally, something that I know at Dido that we are really good at is just understanding that it's not just about the cybersecurity pillar. When I talk to people about compliance regulations, I like to mention the fact that it really encompasses all pillars. So that's business pillars, that's the technical pillar, that's the political, and that's both office politics and geopolitical, as well as cybersecurity. What I mean by that is, for example, you may not be able to meet the requirements in certain compliance standards as your current business. You may have, for example, if you're doing certain things with like ITAR, ITAR is designed largely to prevent non-US citizens from seeing data, at which point you may have non-US citizens working for your organization, and you might have to set up another business organization and set up procedural firewalls. There could be requirements around things like physical items, like having certain facilities not on a ground floor, file cabinets, things like that. I don't want to get into it. There's all different requirements for all different types of compliance, but the main point is they aren't just cybersecurity. A lot of times there's business decisions that have to be made that meet this, and you definitely want to be thinking about those. You'll see some quotes that we talk about where people really kind of spin their wheels, and that kind of ties into the next one really nicely, which is use carve outs. So a carve out is where, for example, let's say you have a company, I'm going to use round numbers, and you have 100 people at the company, but only 50 of them are going to be dealing with the business that involves CUI. You might want to start carving out how that business unit or business units can operate carved out from the rest of the organization. It might involve things like even a different incorporation. It might involve a different workspace instance. It might involve other procedures and solutions, but you can start carving it out. This is a direct quote from one of our customers. And basically what they found is there's no way that they would, well, I'll read it verbatim. There is no way the big company is going to do CMMC. So some of that was time wasted. Some of the controls would get our normal operations bogged down. I mean, there's always value in cybersecurity, but some of the requirements are very specific for the government. And you don't necessarily have to have your entire organization following all of those. Understanding that and figuring out what the minimum that you have to do is a very important process. Another tip, and this is probably the only real salesy part of the presentation, is consider our ATO fast track offerings. We can do things like compliance boot camps. We provide those in 5-day and 2-day accelerated options. We also provide them with an executive option for 2 days so that your staff, your leadership can really understand what's going on. And it can be fastened around multiple different compliance frameworks at once. We can also help you with a cybersecurity quick discovery. That is where we do a very short engagement to identify the major gaps. A lot of times companies spend way too much money and way too much time to produce a 200-page audit document that they don't even know what to do with. I can normally work with our team and we can sit down and come up with a few interviews and some research and identify what are probably the top 10 or top 20 items your company needs to work on without spending a huge amount of money digging up the 2,000 items that you might have. Additionally, we can do a workspace NIST security assessment and hardening. That's effectively following that compliance guide. That compliance guide that I mentioned is 178 pages long. We also have a slide deck as well that's 180 pages long. So, when you start thinking about it, this is hundreds and hundreds of pages of work. There is lots of documentation that has to be done. And that's based on level 2. Level 3 is harder. Level 1 is much easier, but we can help those. And there are lots of questions. I won't read this one out, but for example, people start thinking about and brainstorming how they might make CMMC work. And a question I got recently was, hey, are Chromebooks required? Are Chromebooks a good thing to have? Now, this is a company without Chromebooks already. So they would be adding a new technology to their firm. And basically the answer was no, because they already knew they had PCs, they already knew they had Macs, and now they were going to add Chromebooks to that situation. And we would have to come up with answers for all 110 controls for how they're being met with all 3 of those scenarios. So you have to think about it from that standpoint as well. Chromebooks in certain situations could be ideal and a very, very easy way to do it. Using things like enclaves or VDIs can also be a fabulous way to do it. But if you have things that go outside of those situations, you've now got to document and provide solutions for all of the different scenarios. So, what are your final 3 steps? So, this is really kind of the meat of today. What should you do if you're looking at CMMC, you're worried about it, you're trying to figure out what to do? Well, I think these are the 3 steps that you should take. The first one is that you should look at a carve out. Start thinking about what is the minimal people that you need to implement your CMMC program. Remember that there's more than just technical involved. So, for example, who does your accounting? Who does your billing? Who does your support? Things like that. Certain things have to be kept to only those people. So, you might have to have, for example, a smaller support section of people that are able to handle the support for your CMMC work. The second thing you want to do is really find out your levels. Start talking to your primes, start talking to your cores. I've already talked about that a little bit. Get on Workspace Enterprise Plus, especially if you're level 2 or 3. Start that process right away. The second thing is get a quote, start your budget for having Assured Controls Plus on your environment. You will need it. There's no getting around it. And that's kind of the step 1, pretty basic. Start looking at those basic costs and the underpinning that you need for the implementation. Number 2, you start hardening. And by the way, for number 1, I created a verb, start CMMCing. I couldn't come up with a good one. I wanted parallel between 1, 2, and 3 items there, but that was the best gerund I could come up with. But I apologize for it. It's I'm sure my English teacher is rolling over in her grave with that one. But number 2, start hardening. In this, like I mentioned, at level 1, you're going to start looking at the DFARS. Now, the DFARS is particularly troublesome for a lot of companies because I'll put the specific DFAR over here in the comment, and I think it will go live. David, you can tell me if this goes out to the people on the chat. David already did it, so good, it went out. So one of the things that you might find is if you go read any contracts you currently have that fall under the DoD, you might find that you're already bound under the DFARS. And in particular, this is the 7012 is what it's called. And this is the minimum cybersecurity and also the cyber incident reporting guidelines. And this is effectively what CMMC is covering as well. That it basically enforces a NIST 800-171 program. And you may find that you're already bound by this product, or by, excuse me, by this regulation. The DFARS is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations. And because of it, you may find that you're already behind the wheel because you haven't started an 800-171 program. And should you have any compromises or anything like that, you could be in breach of contract. So definitely start looking at it, but definitely start looking at the 15 controls for level 1 if you think you're only a level 1. If you're level 2, start looking immediately at the Google level 2 configuration guide. There is a link on the earlier slides for it, but it's publicly available. And finally, all the levels, if you're not hitting this, it's not very expensive to get experts involved, and it can save you a lot of money. You can not going down the wrong paths. We do have fast track offerings that help with the ATO. Additionally, moving on to the third step, the start documenting. Any type of regulation or compliance program is going to be pretty heavy on documentation. Now, there's a lot of talk around using some automation, things like OSCL and other things are coming, and I welcome it because we need the ability to automate this. In fact, I'm going to show a little bit of my 50 ATO-isms a little later on, and you'll notice I think number one is automate what you can. So you definitely want to automate, but the paperwork is still pretty needed because a lot of times when I come into companies, they really don't know where they're at from a cybersecurity standpoint. And, as I mentioned here, this is not really this is kind of a DFARS, a CMMC, and an SP 800-171 program. So you may find you're already bound to have an 800-171 program contractually. So definitely start looking at the 800-171 and document what you do today. What do I mean by that? Just write down how you meet or do not meet a control. As an auditor on the other side, what I want to see is facts. I don't want to see things sugar-coated. If you're not doing something perfectly, write down how you think how it's done today, and even write down where you think it's deficient. You can also write down things like what you plan to do with dates. That will tie into something called a POAM, which is a plans of actions and milestones. No system is perfect. And one of the big things we want to see is we want to see maturity. One of the biggest problems that I'm seeing right now is that people want to speed up the CMMC program. The problem with that is CMMC stands for Cyber Maturity Model Certification. And maturity is the word in there that I'm talking about right now. I don't want to see that you haven't been doing this very long. I want to see that you have a culture of cybersecurity at your company and that culture is mature and that it's constantly improving. And so if you can show me that you've got good documentation, that you understand where your gaps are at, where those gaps are, fundamental, where they are fairly minor, what you're doing to close them, that you're staying on track, that you're doing your trainings, etc., I'm going to be a lot more inclined to go ahead and say, okay, you're fine, keep working and keep improving. Uh, One of the ways you can do that is doing what we call stop lighting. So when you take an 800-171 baseline, it's effectively a big giant spreadsheet. You're going to have those 110 controls or the 15 controls if you're level 1. Highlight them in green if you think you're fully compliant, yellow if you think you're mildly compliant, and red if you're non-compliant. It will start to give you a very good visual idea of where you think you're at in your program. It's what we call a gap analysis. But the key point is just start that documentation. Don't worry about writing it for the standpoint of an auditor. Just write down, like, when you get to the section about backups, what backups do you have? What documentation do you know exists? And start building that repository of information. Other people like me can come in and help you refine it and make it better, and compliance teams can make it better. But overall, consider the scope here with CUI. This is also again another quote from the same customer. We spun wheels and got bogged down in details without knowing what in the world we were shooting for. The NIST programs, the NIST documents, like the 800-171, like the 853, are very much spirit documents. They predate the cloud, as most people know it, and they're very technology agnostic. So they just say, do something. They're not going to say how to do it with Google Workspace. So many times you have to do something that we've referred to as documenting and defending that it meets the spirit of the controls. This is not about just checking boxes. This is about showing maturity with your cybersecurity. All right. Now we kind of get down into Q&A, but before I get to that, I do want to go over a couple of items. So the first one that I want to talk a little bit about is, the ATO-isms. And, if you're interested in more of these, you can ask me. My email address that you can use is askcam@ditoweb.com. Additionally, a lot of what we do with cybersecurity is a lot of documentation. So you'll notice I do teach technical writing for Google engineers. You can find that out on the link for developers.google.com. But the short answer is that on May 15th, I'll be teaching technical writing 1. On June 10th, I'll be teaching technical writing 2. And then additionally, I do another one with Dito. All of these are free. All of them are 100% educational, no sales. We do a technical writing with AI, and in that we kind of show people how you can use things like Gemini to speed up your processes. And in fact, we teach both technical writing 1 and two's concepts in technical writing 3 and do it in one class because we use a lot of the tools with Gemini to speed the process up. So yeah, let's see if I can share another tab real quickly. So let me see if it showed up. Yep. Okay. So when I talk about ATO-isms, these are the one-liners. These are the things that if, for example, you engage with me and my team, you'll find that we are repeating or stating quite often. And, as I mentioned, automation is key. So anything you can automate is better. So I love the idea of doing things like OSCL and, taking computer readable information and being able to monitor it, look for things like what we call drift assessments, look for changes in configuration that could be problematic, check your configuration, see if it's right, and do so automatically. Additionally, there's lots more of these particular items. Don't be a checkbox successor is a big one. Document and defend. The idea is there's also some controls that may conflict with each other. So it's not uncommon to have to document what you're doing and whatnot so that you can then meet the requirements and convince an auditor, if you're at a level that has to be audited, that you're meeting the spirit of the particular control. But if you're interested in more of those, let me know. We're always happy to talk to people, share our knowledge. We do have some questions over here. So, is there a document that identifies all the controls covered by Google Workspace? So, Masad, I think the answer to that question is you're going to look at the configuration guideline. This goes into a concept that gets a little hairy. It's called inheritance. Inheritance is basically going to come down to, like, for example, whether you can fully or partially inherit a control from a particular service provider, what's known as a CSP, cloud service provider in this case. So, it sometimes it comes down to what service providers you're using. And many organizations, many enterprise organizations, for example, are multi-cloud. And we have to look at the entire ecosystem of the technology stack sometimes to see whether or not you can inherit something fully. I'll give you a very quick example. In many compliance frameworks, you have a requirement to control what's called portable media devices, aka a USB drive. Now, where you can get into problems is if you look at Google's documentation, if you look at Google's SSPP or their system security and privacy plan, that document will say that their data centers have no USB ports in the servers that they monitor for all that stuff. And their SSPP might imply that you can fully inherit that control. There could be a situation where you can't fully inherit it because, for example, you might have administrative machines that are inside your boundary. And by the way, identifying your authorization boundary is a big part of any compliance project. You now have to have software that would disable those USB ports on the machines so that, for example, keyboards would work, but a portable media device would not work. So the compliance guide that I mentioned earlier does talk about what's there. There are as well, compliance walkthroughs for that, but you will need to look at each one of them in the light of your technology. If you're not using anything but Google Workspace, then there's ways to meet it. And that's where things like using virtual desktop infrastructures, VDI, using Google's VDI, using an enclave, using Cameo, things like that might help you be more compliant and faster because you're able to remote into those machines, which then meet the requirements. And you've disabled features like, for example, many people are probably familiar with it, but you can go into like a Citrix cluster and it will mount the USB drive that's on your machine virtually over the cloud. And so that would basically break that portable media device type of compliance control. So that would be the document we would look at. The next question I see is from Elliot Murphy. So Elliot says, we currently have Workspace and can get assured controls. Can we work on everything ourselves from those specific Workspace configuration guidelines you mentioned? Absolutely, though I want to be pedantic. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to call you out or correct you or be a jerk, but when I'm talking about cybersecurity, when I talk about compliance, sometimes the devil's in the details. So there is a product called Assured Controls. There's a product called Assured Controls Plus. You must have Assured Controls Plus. You only wrote about Assured Controls, but absolutely, and I love helping people. So send me an email. Happy to give you some guidance, point you in a good direction. But I encourage most organizations to definitely have people internally. You can't afford to hire consultants to do all the work, and there just aren't enough people for the 80,000 plus level 2 CMMC people that will be looking at compliance over the next year. There just aren't enough of us out there to do all the work. So we've got to, have a many hands make light work. We've got to have people like yourself, Elliot, that are working on this or building people with GRC, experience in that regulation. What can we help with on the implementation? So, the answer to that question is we can help with everything. I mean, we've done some of the largest companies in the world, and we specialize in doing cyber for cyber companies, but we also do, everything down to, mom and pop shops and small organizations and do compliance. So we can really help with everything. Typically, what I would go back to is those a few items that I mentioned for the ATO fast track. So, in particular, the boot camp. So we can help, we can help teach the teachers. We can help train people at your team to take and feel confident that they can attack this problem and yet have a good foundation, a good understanding of where they need to strike off from. So that would be number one. Number two, we can help with an implementation. So we can help with that concept of starting your baseline, doing the hardening, looking at your technology stack, figuring out what's going on. And next thing, the third thing that we can help that's a lighter lift is we can help with your gap analysis. What are the big security problems that you have at your company that you're going to need to address? But we also do I generally say, like, one of my goals is to never give a client homework. And so, we can do literally everything from like 1% of the work to like 99% of the work. So it's really just going to come down to cost. Cybersecurity people aren't inexpensive, but sometimes it can be a smarter way to do it because we can avoid a lot of waste, and especially wasted time. So a lot of companies spin their wheels, and that's a constant thing that we hear about. We're not looking to make you waste any time or jump forward. We want to make sure that you're doing things right and that you're making progress. And that's another one of those ATisms that you'll hear from us. But progress is more important than perfection. So we want to make sure that you get started and jump in on it. Thank you, Elliot, by the way, and Masad. All right, David. I don't know if there's any more questions, but my contact information is up there. Ask Cam. Like I said, we won't sugarcoat things. We will send out the slides as well. We are doing the technical writing classes as well. I do encourage you to come read them. You'll see also, especially in Technical Writing 3, how we're using Gemini. And if you've got Google Workspace now, you're licensed for Notebook LM Plus. We'll talk about how you could use that, for doing documentation, and you'll immediately see the extrapolation of where that could help in a compliance situation like handling CMMC. So, any final questions before we? All right.
Great job, Cam. I appreciate everyone's attention today, and thanks for joining us. We will follow up, as Cam mentioned, with the slides and materials for everyone's future reference, and we look forward to supporting your CMMC compliance journey moving forward. Thanks again.
Hi, everybody.